Yesterday's Gaza ceasefire debate descended into procedural chaos. Are MPs more interested in political point scoring than a life-saving decision? I think that it was such an important decision to be made. I mean, there are thousands of people being killed every day in Gaza.
And that's the thing. Like, not only is it obviously a betrayal of the people being murdered, but technically Parliament passed an amendment calling for a ceasefire yesterday. That should be good. But actually what it is a slap in the face to everyone. It's just shitting on our democracy. It's not really passing anything that's going to do anything. It's watered down to the point where they criticize Israel no times, but criticize the Palestinians twice or something. Like, it's ridiculous.
It just appeared to me that it was a politically motivated point of procedure. And it completely made the mockery of the debate. It isn't clear what the result of the debate was. And I just think that the UK Parliament didn't do itself any service.
Stella, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do, Rosemary. And I want to start, and I think I probably speak for Laura as well, in saying this did not cover any of us in glory. This is not what any of us came into politics for. You are absolutely right. This is an incredibly serious, sensitive issue.
But you won the vote, Stella. There were Labour MPs literally cock-a-hoop boasting about how they'd won. No one else voted. Literally, the adults literally weren't in the room anymore. The Tories had got up and left. The SNP had got up and left. So you were the only dickheads who voted, and you won. Bravo.
Very complicated. There's lots of different factors to it. And I think last night, it looks like we lost sight of what really matters. And that matters because it means that you lose confidence in the decisions that we were making.
So why did you... I've heard MPs all day saying, this does not reflect well on us, but each one has been blaming all the other parties on their own. So why did you do it? And I'll ask the same of Laura.
Yeah, and I'm not going to mudsling or point score about all of this because it is too important. And I sit here as somebody who actually took quite a bit of hope in the end out of the situation, because in November I voted to support a ceasefire. And actually last night, what became very apparent is there was a consensus across the House that people feel that the UK should be joining in the calls for a cease to the violence, for intervention, that actually what might be about to happen in Rafah is completely wrong and not going to help. And I also sit here, if you take one name away from you, Aded Lifshitz is an 84-year-old Jewish man who's being held by Hamas. He used to drive Gazans to the hospital across the border. His daughter is my constituent. She wants a ceasefire. There is much more agreement on the ground in Israel and in Gaza that what is happening is not right. And actually what you saw in Parliament last night was a lot of people who want to find a way through that. So the fact that's not come out of this, that's on us. And I take my responsibility and accountability in that process as well, because it means that on other difficult, complicated issues, you're going to lose faith in our capacity to find a way through.
What do you mean lose faith? You can't lose faith in something you didn't have faith in the first place.
Well, that's the issue, right? People keep saying, oh, this is unprecedented. This is something that, it brings shame on the House. And it's like, but this was always going to happen. All of these things are on gentlemen's agreements and things about precedents. Nothing's written down. Nothing's codified. It's all based upon essentially decades, centuries worth of, well, if we all agree to do the thing that's right rather than take advantage. Yeah.
I had to explain to my Americans as we were watching it yesterday, and they were like, well, why is it like this? And I just said, it's centuries of just amalgamated bits of shit that just clung together. And it works generally, but when it comes under any kind of stress, as you saw with the Brexit thing, and then this thing yesterday, like it comes apart. Once one side pulls their support from it, it collapses.
Well, yeah, because once, say for example, Boris Johnson makes a mockery of the system by proroguing Parliament.
Yeah, exactly.
Illegally, having been judged to illegally have done it, but there are plenty of other gentlemen's agreements that throughout like the Boris Johnson period weren't adhered to. This is I said this on stream yesterday. It's Blair. Blair was the one who changed politics in this country so that there were no gentlemen's agreements anymore. It was all about chicanery. It was all about background deals. It was all about using every single angle that you could to your advantage, right? Like the Tories are despicable individuals, but there was just something about like the Blair, Campbell, Mandelson praxis that really denigrated the way people do politics in this country. Peter Oborn talks about this a lot, about how in like the 50s to the 80s, like, you know, maybe not the 80s as such, that was when the rot started creeping in, but then was really destroyed by Blair. Up until the 80s at the very least, everybody agreed towards the principles. Everybody took those gentlemen's agreements to heart and were in for politics for the very specific reason that they believed in something would be best for everybody. As statespeople representing the public in an incredibly prestigious role as being a member of Parliament, of Her Majesty's Parliament at the time. And then there's been the last 3 decades, certainly, and maybe the decade previously a little bit, it's all been about deals. It's all been about prestige and power and money and getting This is my point. Is it's essentially the Americanization of the system without the fundamental constitutional reform to go along with it.
It's really easy in public life to find somebody to shout at, but actually politics shouldn't be just about can we shout at somebody because you're cross with them, because does that move things forward? And the saddest thing about last night is actually that probably did move the debate forward. It probably does give a clear steer to the government about the kind of conversations we want them to be part of. That is not the conversation we're having today, and I understand why we're not having that today, but that, I think, is the conversation we would all really like to have, isn't it? Is what do we do next to help stop the violence, get the hostages home, get the aid in, and get the two-state solution that we know is the only future for Israel and Palestine.
So Rosemary certainly found it a deeply unedifying spectacle yesterday. Did it show that MPs are more interested in political point scoring than a life-saving decision?
No, and I agree with Rosemary that this subject is too important and it is too sensitive to be kicked around like a political football.
So was there no element of that yesterday as far as, I mean, for example, you could level this at all the parties, the SNP, Labour and the Conservatives, but since you're here representing the government, when the government decided to stick in an amendment the day before the vote, was that not political point? Was that not playing politics?
Well, look, there were sort of elements of the wording that none of the 3 main parties agreed on. That's why there were amendments. And you'll know that it ended with the irregular outcome of the Speaker apologising to the House. And I want to be completely clear.
And then running away like a bitch.
I'm not laying into Lindsay Hoyle at all. He is a very, very decent person. In fact, he has done a huge amount to restore the reputation of the Speaker's chair since he's been in office. He said last night...
Has he? Are you sure about that?
I think he made a mistake. And actually, in politics, we go at each other the whole time, sometimes in a way that is toxic and unhealthy, and I think that this should be put behind us. I agree with Stella. If you listen to the substance of the debate, particularly the opening remarks from the government minister and the shadow foreign secretary, it was overwhelming how much consensus there was.
So were the Conservatives right to say, well, actually, we're not going to take part in this anymore, we're going to walk out, which is what happened?
Well, look,
and then the whole thing all went
yeah, look, it unravelled.
And just look, a thing that doesn't even get touched on, the fact that this was a debate where you would expect the Foreign Secretary to give the government's position, except that cunt's in the House of Lords because it's 1830. Like, it's ridiculous.
Shit, exactly, yeah. Like, they can't even have the person who's supposed to be there making the government's line on this clear because he's in a different house.
Except
and
that...
what was Penny Mordaunt right to say we're not going to take part in this and to walk out?
Because I almost lost track of what the procedural issues were. But
that is what happened.
There were 3
was she right to do that?
There were 3 amendments. It impeded the SNP from putting theirs forward. I may not even be saying it quite correctly. Somebody can jump in. But
so she was right to walk out then?
Look, as I say...
So for the government to withdraw from the whole thing completely?
The Speaker made the unusual decision to apologise, and you can... I'm not going for him at all.
No,
but that's how the evening ended. But I think just going back to where there were points of agreement, there was an agreement that there was an immediate need to stop fighting, to get the hostages out as an imperative, to get rapid and unimpeded aid into Gaza. And actually, if you look at what David Cameron has been doing and saying publicly, talking about a two-state solution,
he's been to the left of the Labour Party, which honestly tells me everything I need to know. Really just remarkable shit.
Sort of abstract, but actually meaningfully what that would look like in terms of the governance of Palestine, the rebuilding of Gaza, the rights and responsibilities of the two sides. And I hope you'll at least consider that, actually, in assessing how seriously this is taken by parliamentarians.
OK, well, let's hear from some of our audience.
It's not taken seriously because nobody can put their name to any statement calling out Israel for any of the war crimes that they've committed. Not even in like simple, not even like incredibly light terms, and even mention that they're war crimes, but that they have done bad things. Every motion is, well, maybe they shouldn't invade Rafah. The 30,000 people that have died, 20,000 of whom at least are civilians, right? That's fine. Any more than that's a problem. It doesn't matter that they've literally trying to clear out the entirety of the Gaza Strip, that they're dividing it into and trapping people in Rafah and in the bottom half of Khan Yunis. None of this makes any difference to these people. They're just like, well, the fight, you've had your fun now. You've had your fun with the genocide, Israel. Maybe temper it slightly. Yet we still sell them weapons. We still continually give them international license to continue what they're doing, as long as they don't invade Rafah, which they've already been bombing anyway, despite being the world's largest refugee camp at this point. And there's no, everybody's just cucked. They're entirely cucked out to, again, the Western foreign policy establishment on this. They can't even say the basic thing like, what you have done already is wrong. Because it is wrong. We've seen the statements coming from all of these people, not just the statements that have been brought up in the ICJ, although those are statements that are clearly statements of intent to genocide. And then on top of that, the clip that you just showed, that there will be no children, there'll be no Palestinian state. The only condemnation people ever do of Israel is when settlers go into the settler violence in the West Bank. That's it. That's the only thing that ever gets condemnation.
But it's
like that line has already been crossed by Blinken,
again,
right?
Isn't it? It's the ratchet thing. As soon as they get a new settlement, no one says, okay, you have to get rid of that settlement. That's just accepted as the new normal now.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So the Palestinians just have to lose more and more land. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Utterly, it's a rogue state. It's a total rogue state that is flouting every single possible part of their liberal rules-based order, whatever it is. And there's no criticism from anybody. Like, the only people who criticise them are people on the left. And I honestly feel like I'm going fucking insane. I genuinely feel like I'm just being gaslit by an entire political establishment, in contrary to the things that I'm seeing with my own eyes and hearing with my own ears coming out of the mouths of people who represent the government of Israel. Just again, constant calls for genocide.
There's a genocide, so why is it so difficult for Britain to vote for a ceasefire when other countries have, other than USA?
Well, Britain loves genocide. I don't know, that's a very silly way of wording that. Britain loves a good genocide. We've done plenty of them, and we've ignored plenty more. Britain does not have a great track record of intervening to stop genocides, unfortunately.
True. I say, okay, the ceasefire thing that's happened. We've had a ceasefire vote. The House now believes there should be a ceasefire. With all these caveats that Labour wanted to shoehorn into the SNP motion. We actually have that now. We've officially got this House wants to call for a ceasefire and to say that a Rafah invasion shouldn't happen on the ground. But again, there's a genocide, so like what's going to happen about all of the genocidal acts that have happened from October the 7th up to this point? What's going to happen about all of the people that have died already? Where's going to come? I'm using our weapons as well. Where's the condemnation?
This is, I mean, to use my little history nonsense now, the reason that the definition of genocide under the UN is so sort of silly and doesn't really cover much of what actually counts as genocide in some cases is purposely because both the United States and the Soviet Union and Britain wanted there not to be too specific a definition, because that would make them all guilty of genocides that they had perpetrated in the past.
I think we've got to take account of the fact that the vote itself wouldn't have made any difference to the situation on the ground. That doesn't mean that it is not an important vote. I think it is important for Parliament to speak and to tell the world what we think and what we stand for. What I found really strange is that given the tension and the pressure that some of the MPs have been under when there are protests, near people's houses or in front of people's houses. People are being hounded on social media for their views and their stands. I would have thought that the one thing that Parliament would do, or the MPs would do for themselves, is to try and protect themselves by finding a consensus position that doesn't divide, the parties, so, sort of pitch one against the other.
This is another element of it. The MPs are being put under pressure. Good. I don't want their lives to be threatened or their families to be threatened. I want them to feel the pressure and the force of the British people.
Did you see the tweet from Paul Sweeney saying we had a baying mob trying to break down his door, and it was just like 5 old people with some signs? Absolutely pathetic.
Well, Dan Hodges, author of the famous "We Must Stab Jezza in the Heart" as a vampire.
It was
thing.
Labour must kill vampire Jezza.
Exactly.
Literally was his
going on
headline.
about threats being made to members of parliament. And I just thought to myself, we have entered a phase of when
yeah,
a
'cause-
dickhead like that can go on about, the threatening of MPs. This is a disgrace to our
It's- yeah,
democracy.
'cause
And I
he-
want to show him his own oeuvre and go, look at yourself, you mug.
On top of that, we've got Stella Creasy on the panel. Like, I don't actually hate Stella Creasy that much. I think she's fine as far as Labour MPs go. She's not a transphobe, which helps.
She's all right, yeah.
She's fine. Like, I mean, she's not what I want in a Labour MP, but there's certainly way, way worse. But she was the one who said, well, "Oh, I'm being threatened by the public," and she had a candlelight vigil outside her empty constituency office. That was the baying mob. It's a candlelight vigil. You know, again, nobody talks about like the rise of far right violence, except they're using this as a justification for essentially trying to criminalize the right to protest for pro-Palestine demonstrations, despite the fact that there has been literally 0 instances of violence as a result of the Palestinian protests from any protesters at all. 0 recorded. The only people who've been arrested have been for the hate crime of having bad signs, whatever, or the people who had the paraglider patches glorifying Hamas. That's it. Those are the only things that we've had. Like hate crime,
Which is
sure,
just anti-Doncaster bigotry, and I won't have that kind of anti-Northern nuts. It's an outrage.
But like then they've been. They've displayed hateful iconography, I guess, is the only actual offences being committed by pro-Palestine protesters. 0 violent offences. The only violent offences that have ever existed in reference to the Palestine protests is from the hate mob that was whipped up by Suella Braverman.
At the moment, it looks as if the government is on one side, and then we've got the SNP on the other side, and Labour somewhere in the middle trying to find a way that pleases all their parliamentarians. And I don't think it is going to work. We need to take the heat out of the situation. It is going too far. And I think we don't have to wait until something bad happens to an MP for us to say, actually, we need to dial down the tension.
I mean, you make a really interesting point. Dialing down the tension was the antithesis of what happened yesterday, Camilla.
Obviously, when Sir Lindsay Hoyle tried to explain why he had done what he did, he was saying that he wanted to ensure sort of MP security, because as you say, sir, there have been these situations where we've had quite aggressive protesters outside MPs' houses and offices, which I don't think is justified at all, regardless of the horror of the circumstances in the Middle East.
You're not allowed to protest to seek redress of grievance from your government, actually. Shut up, plebs.
And a time when they're literally doing the opposite of their job. We pay their bills to represent us on the world stage and in Parliament. They represent us. There is a super majority of the public who want an immediate ceasefire. A plurality of the public don't even think that any Israeli action militarily is justified post-October the 7th, given what they've done in a genocidal manner. And they're not doing their job. They're not doing their job at representing our views fairly. And of course, we're absolutely mad. We're crazy. We're mad. Of course we are.
The extra galling element of it is that most of those MPs have second housing allowance. So we essentially buy their second house so that they can live in London while they're at Parliament, which I mean is neither here nor there. But we pay for their houses that we're then not allowed to protest outside of.
My problem with how things panned out yesterday is that effectively House procedures and conventions were changed in response to an angry mob. Where does that actually end? I mean, in public life in a democratic country, if an MP doesn't support a ceasefire for their own reasons, perhaps because they think that a ceasefire now isn't the right time, or that they want to wait for Hamas to down their weapons, or they're making the argument that they think that the hostages need to be released in order to dampen down what's happening, they are entitled to have that opinion without feeling threatened by members of the public.
Okay, well,
you know,
they can have that opinion. They're entitled to that opinion, but their job is not to give their opinion. Their job is to represent their constituents. If their constituents want them to vote for a ceasefire, that should be what should take precedent here, rather than whatever Anthony Blinken fucking thinks. Because again, that's who is dictating policy to the Keir Starmer office, and that's who Keir Starmer dictates policy to the whips, and that's who the whips dictate policy to the people on the benches.
Yeah.
Give me a party list to vote for, and then it's obvious that I'm not voting for an individual representative. I'm voting for whatever the party wants to do.
Jess Phillips wants to represent 4 people in Edgbaston. How dare you?
Yeah, exactly. Because she's not even doing it. I mean, actually,
she's
that's a
not.
lie. Jess Phillips is doing that because she did vote for a ceasefire. She resigned from the front bench to vote for a ceasefire the first time round. So I will give it to Jess Phillips. She is actually doing her job with regard to this one because literally she is representing her constituents because they wanted to vote for a
True,
ceasefire.
but to be
The
fair-
reason why people are angry, when protesting outside MPs' offices is because they are not doing their job, which is to represent their constituents.
This idea that
But given
you've
that
got
some
the
of them
wrong
have
opinions.
felt threatened and some have been threatened, many MPs have been threatened, was Lindsay Hoyle right, irrespective of whether you think he was right to allow all three debates or not? Was he right to take that into account? I mean, the Prime Minister today has
Also,
said,
can I
actually,
just-
we have to be able
This is a broader topic, but I think it's worth touching upon briefly. Being a politician is not without threat. Inherently, I mean, we literally saw David Amos relatively recently, and Joe Cox before that, and there's been various people killed and murdered, and we are one of the safest places on earth to be a politician. Politics is about the use of violence to one extent or another.
And there's currently, there literally is violence knit into the system currently because the weapons being used to commit genocide have been sold to Israel by us upon the whims of our government. That's it, right? There's the rub. And any MP saying, "Oh well, nasty protesters outside my house," I just don't care. I just don't care when children in Gaza are being mass slaughtered. I just couldn't give
Well,
a shit at
exactly.
this point.
People voting for the continuation of bombs falling on hospitals, moaning about the use of political violence, is a bit rich. It's a little bit rich, you know.
to debate this without fear or favour, irrespective
Absolutely.
of the danger to
And
MPs.
that's the point. I think that Lindsay did it with the very best of intentions because I think he is an honest and decent man who does care deeply about MP security and he's got a legacy of very much caring about it. However, when does that end? You know, because actually you're then dispensing with the traditions of the House, you're dispensing with the advice of the clerks because you're trying to appease an angry mob. So it's an angry mob at the moment about Gaza. In a few weeks' time, it could be an angry mob about the environment. And apparently some MPs have the wrong opinions that then opens them up to threatening behaviour and even death threats. You know, when does that end? I think, you know, the House Commons has to be a chamber.
Apparently, the real threats to politicians are coming from Palestine protesters who've been incredibly peaceful and Just Stop Oil protesters who are also being incredibly peaceful, apart from when they stand in the middle of the road. But the fact that the things that people these bring up as being the potential kind of touch paper to light the fire of the terrorist attacks on MPs, they don't name the actual people who commit the terrorist attacks against MPs, which in the case of Joe Cox was a far-right person who shouted Britain first when he was murdering her. That guy who tried to run over Sadiq Khan, the other guy who tried to drive down to Dover to firebomb a migrant centre. This is where the actual terrorism is coming from at this point. Like
one question that we've glossed over, Fiona, I think you asked earlier, was Penny Mordaunt right to walk out of Parliament yesterday?
Yes, I didn't get an answer to that, actually. Don't know if you noticed.
My personal view, I did. My personal view is no. You don't walk out on something that's this important. There are procedural matters, you debate them, you discuss them. That's what she's there for as a representative member of Parliament.
Well, she's literally she's leader of the House.
Leader of the House of Commons. Their job is to lead the House of Commons.
To preside over this shit. Like, I really think, right, obviously, Labour have done some awful shit throughout this. The SNP have been less than scrupulous. But the Tories really are getting away with murder and a lot of this stuff. The Tories have behaved appallingly. And people are rightly condemning the actions of Keir Starmer. Because not only do the Tories, including the Leader of the Commons, just fucking throw a hissy fit and refuse to vote on a matter that's now passed and made them look stupid, but on top of that, we get these stories about Simon Clarke apparently trying to railroad the Speaker from the other side as well. And the Tories have got off scot-free with all of this. And as I said, and nobody comes out this looking good. And the SNP are the people who've done the least wrong here, almost certainly. Like a country mile as well. And just the Tories, that everybody's going after Keir Starmer, but the Tories have behaved despicably.
Well, it wasn't walking out from the discussion itself. It was because three...
the debates didn't happen after that. I mean, which you...
But the debate was already concluded. The point was because three amendments had been selected in this irregular way. It wasn't Parliament ducking its obligations. It was a very irregular night that ended up.
No, it wasn't Parliament. It was individually all of the parties ducking their obligations, which collectively meant that Parliament ducked its obligations. But technically speaking, it did actually do its job by calling for a ceasefire in the most ineffective and pathetic way possible. But technically, it did fulfill its duty. Brilliant. Thanks.
I make that admission immediately, and I've said already that I don't think that it reflected the sensitivity and importance, but it wasn't because she was ducking the issue, it was because of the sort of mess, the procedural mess that had unfolded.
Anyway.
You sharing your opinion is a very good one, because it's delaying procedures, it's delaying any decisions being made. I mean, think about amongst your peer groups, you cannot say what your opinion on this is. It's impossible. How on earth politicians can't say anything because then they're told they have to leave their position, or dependent on which way they fall. So I just think we need to be able to say what our opinion is on this matter to actually move forward and for something to be done, because at the moment we're still in gridlock. We're not doing anything, and again we need to.
This is a really good point. This is a really good point, very specifically because it's calling out the whips. It's calling out the whip system by saying, well, MPs don't have a free vote on these matters because party whips will remove them from the front bench. And 100% correct. Is that actually kind of ground zero for why this mess occurred is because Keir Starmer told his own MPs he would fire them after whipping to abstain, or whipping to vote against the SNP motion if it was unamended because of this reference to collective punishment, right? This is ground zero for this whole mess, is the fact that MPs who, even if they felt in earnest that the SNP motion could be carried, if they were on the front bench, their positions were threatened by the Labour leadership because of a disagreement about wording. And that is just not acceptable. It may be how things work and how things have always worked, but in terms of something like this motion where people say, for example, that they're under duress by the public because of the messages that they've been getting, well then give your MPs a free vote.
Exactly. If both parties had just given the free vote and not, but like, because essentially it's non-binding anyway. It's not that the government were going to have to do anything about it. So just let it be. They create.
But there is something really precious and important about our British political system that's not like the American system, where actually we live in our. I love Walthamstow. If you've not been to Walthamstow, come visit. It's an amazing place, and I love being part of my community. I love the fact that people stop me. They have strong opinions. We do argue. We do disagree. I don't want to live in a bubble disconnected from my community. I think it's really important to the work that we do.
But does it ever make you think twice about what you're saying in the House of Commons?
No, because otherwise you're not doing your job. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And I do think, look, frankly, we all owe it to change and challenge this.
That's the thing as well, is that she actually got onto a serious point here about the constituency link stuff that I was talking about before. And to Stella Creasy's credit, she said, I voted for the ceasefire the first time, I vote for that. I live in my constituency, I want to be part of that. But we go back to what I was saying before about the Whips office, is that they are the ones who are constraining MPs' ability to be able to do this, to be able to actually do their real job, which is represent their constituents. And they're not doing it broadly across the entire country.
Yep.
Press included, as well as the people who take part, because you're right, it's not just in Parliament people feel they can't have a conversation anymore. And, you know, we do need to have more nuance. The gentleman is right. It's not that a vote in the UK Parliament would change anything directly. What I think all of us had hoped was that it would give a clear steer to the Foreign Secretary in the conversations he's having with our international partners about the sorts of issues and the sorts of pressure we could bring to bear in our relationships and our conversations, not just, frankly, with Israel, but also with the Qataris who have a relationship with Hamas. Because ultimately, I hope none of us came into politics just to shout at each other. We did come in to make progress on the causes that we care about and to represent the community.
No, loads of them went there because it was a thing to do, or because they wanted to make money for their rich friends. And to be fair, that is the one area that the Tories have done very well in. Very efficient.
They've joined politics to get a future high-paying career job in industry, like Nick Clegg ruining the country and then swanning off to Facebook.
Yeah. Or they just wanted to be Prime Minister because they essentially were told from birth that they were born to rule. And so they get to be Prime Minister because, you know, David Cameron and Boris Johnson obviously were going to become Prime Minister. Why wouldn't they? They were born for it. And that's why they become politicians.
Communities that we care about, that is missing from this debate. It's not just about Gaza. Of course people feel strongly. You cannot see what is going on there. You cannot feel the anger. I see rising anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in my beloved community because of this issue. But we've also got people who care passionately about abortion who come and cross those lines as well. We've got people who care passionately about climate change. This isn't about individual issues. This is about how we are now conducting our politics. And all of us have to change that.
So, Laura, let me ask you then. I mean, this is you, as I say, you've been the subject of harassment as well.
Yes.
Very serious harassment. Is this something that gives you pause when you're speaking in the House of Commons, or are other MPs talking to you about how they are becoming wary of what they might say for fear of repercussions outside the House of Commons?
I'm aware of other MPs who have experienced serious harassment around this issue. That wasn't my experience. Like Stella, I actually respect and appreciate robust challenge from my constituents, and on certain issues they've developed my thinking, and I think it should be like that. I think the relationship at times between MP and constituent should be quite symbiotic. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is a country where ultimately we settle our differences at the ballot box.
A bit much.
And elected members of parliament must be allowed to go about and represent in the way they think is appropriate without being frightened from doing so. Otherwise, you just drive down the quality of people who are willing to put themselves forward to stand for office. But can I just say one?
How can they get worse than they currently are?
Okay,
Are you going to start unearthing the fucking literal trolls from under bridges now to be MPs? What?
Do what the population wants. Do your job. It's not difficult.
One thing, in response to the gentleman up there, I think there were two questions where people said, well, what does it matter? Well, who cares what happens here? But in a way, what happened last night in microcosm shows that it mattered to parliamentarians, although it was a clumsy way of expressing it. It mattered what was happening to the people who were out on the street outside Parliament. And actually...
Well, hang on, Laura. You're not denying there was a bit of politicking going on as well.
Well, yes, but this issue it does matter, and it's important it doesn't poison our discourse. I don't accept that we're irrelevant. Actually, I think having a former Prime Minister as our Foreign Secretary gives us extra kind of clout on the world stage. I do...
He's not even elected.
No,
we're sending the foreign secretary. One of the things that the foreign secretary does is goes around and, in theory, promotes democratic change in countries. So we're going to send this unelected wanker, who was one of the least popular prime ministers ever, elected on a minority, to go and tell everyone else how to do democracy around the world.
They say, oh, well, actually, no, I don't think that it's just America. Then why do all of our politicians do exactly the same thing as America? Apart from the SNP. At least the SNP have the guts to say, no, we defy the Washington line on this, and we are putting forward explicit condemnation of Israel, and the remainder of our MPs refuse to back it. It's pathetic.
It would be genuinely interesting to see, though, if they get into, like, say, if they become independent and they're with the government in Scotland, whether they would alter that line having to do international negotiations on a bilateral basis with America in a way that they currently don't, because they're essentially a regional government within the UK. So they don't actually negotiate with the US government. Whether they would necessarily be swallowed up by that process in the way that all the other Western governments have been.
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.